we're so focused on the day and the week and the month that we forget that like a lot of the success is just not going down these wrong paths, not doing something for, like you said, 10 years and then being like, oh my gosh, I have to start all over again. And I think that there is this sort of friction that happens because of our insecurities, because of all these different things. And I think it also is rooted in this desperation, right? Where people are just like, I need a job now. And I don't want to go through all this. I just want a job, right? I just want it to be over. I just want whatever feeling I'm feeling to stop. And maybe this is getting worse in the social media instant gratification culture. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that. But, when it comes to like pushing through these things, you not only realize like, oh, this is what I do want to do eventually, but you realize like, there's so many more ways to do it. There's so many more opportunities. You might even find a career path that you didn't even expect. I think you and I probably didn't realize coaching was going to be where we ended up when we started meeting people for coffee years ago, right?
Could not have predicted that. Yes.
Right?
No.
And so like, when we think about these emotions and we think about like following curiosity rather than following desperation, right? And pushing through the discomfort, a lot of what we talk about here is like, these are the unconventional approaches to finding a job. And as a coach, I'm always just like, why are these not the conventional approaches? Like, why do people get locked in the resumes and the job boards and everything like that? What are your thoughts there?
It is, first of all, let's acknowledge that the way that most jobs are found, the way that most companies pursue the workflow of bringing and hiring people, bringing in and hiring people is not highly effective. It's not, for so many different reasons. And now I don't think that's news to anybody. I think almost everyone can look at this and say, this sucks. This is not working. Like, how do we have a situation where we get, 1,500? So we just recently hired on 3 people to our organization, and we got I think around like 1,500 or 2,000, some crazy amount of people applying. Like it's just absolutely ridiculous. And we're a relatively small organization. Like, I can't imagine what some of the larger,
right?
even more advertised. And, I used to see that all the time working as an HR leader back when I was in charge of things like recruitment, talent acquisition, and, talent development, those types of things. But it's broken in many different ways. Now, that's a much longer conversation that we probably don't have time for on this podcast at the moment. But I just want to acknowledge that first. The reason that it happens is because we have this socially accepted method of how recruiting and hiring happens currently. And it is not great, but it is a good enough solution to keep people coming into organizations. Now, what it does, the reason I believe it's broken is because, well, first of all, let's just look at the fact that almost nobody loves their work. Almost nobody is enamored with their work. If we go back to those Gallup stats way back when, like, that's proof positive right there, because we also know that when people are working in their strengths, when people are enjoying their work, there is some wonderful evidence to support productivity that comes along with it too. Not from one study, but from many studies. And also there is some other elements to support that leads to healthier people, less stressed, all of the things that companies would benefit from if they're looking at the long term. At the same time, we're not necessarily looking at the long term. So we've had this short-term solution that we've just tolerated for, well, how long has it been? I guess it's been relatively similar since the internet really came about at this point.
I think it's an approach that I think maybe at one point worked fairly well, right? Like, I think when it started out and you were applying to jobs via literal mail, or
like
facts,
newspaper
right?
ads and
Like when a
exactly.
cover letter was a literal cover letter to let them
Yep.
know what job it was for, because there wasn't a digital description that you applied through. It is one of those things where I feel like it seems to be a process that doesn't let anything die, but allows everything new to be added, right? And so
yes, that's a great way to think about it. I love that, Martin.
and so we're still doing things that are like a carryover from a fax machine and an envelope that keep getting re-rationalized and re-justified as like, well, you've got to put them through hoops, right? It's like the number of take-home tests and interviews that people go through just to, get a basic job. I had someone trying to get a like a pretty entry level role at a company, and they had 2 take-home assignments and I think 5 or 6 interviews, and I was just like, this seems way too much for what you're going to end up getting paid at the end of this. And I'm trying to, we want to keep that curiosity mindset, right? So even as a coach, I'm like, I want to at least like understand this to some degree, because there is, I think, to your point, when you put up a job description, I mean, I've put up ones for like a resume writer in the past, and again, I'm even smaller than you, and it's like the number of the flood that comes through. And I think that that's maybe it's maybe an after effect of the globalization and like you said, the internet, right? Like everything used to be just, you're competing with your local environment. So if you're, the one software developer or the 30 software developers in your area, you're going to get a job. But now you're competing with the best software developers in all of the world, including other countries. And it just becomes this, you kind of have to have every individual be an Apple or a Nike when it comes to selling themselves in order to just compete for basic things. Are you seeing sort of the same thing?
Well, I think that anytime you have those types of challenging situations, it creates opportunity for the individuals that want to take advantage of that opportunity. Now, first of all, I love your point that this is a like leftover product of something that used to work really well. I hadn't thought about that in that way, and I think that is very true. That is amazing. I love that. And also, you said something else too that I just want to acknowledge, that I would actually take the opposite direction on, which you talked about the entry level role that had a ridiculous number of interviews and everything. I would argue actually that most organizations do not do enough due diligence. Now, I think that there are other creative ways to be able to pursue that. Like we will end up doing probably 15 interviews before we hire someone. But also some of those roles, we will have them do a small paid project. Once we start getting into those later stage interviews, we ask a lot before we bring somebody on board. Mm-hmm. Also, the reason that we do that is I want to ensure that it's creating just as much fit for them as it is for us, because we get highly disproportionate returns as an organization, but I want them to have highly disproportionate returns for what they're getting out of their work at the same time. So what I would argue is that most organizations out there are not going to do that type of due diligence, and it's on us as individuals to take ownership of that and find out, is this truly a fit? Is it truly a fit for me? Is it truly a fit for the other organization that I'm potentially going to work with? Like, do I want to spend my time with these people? There's a crazy, just absolutely nutty study out there that was, I forget how many years it was, like spread over 30 years, where they followed all of these close relationships and also second, third, fourth degree connections. And what was just absolutely insane at the end of this, I think it was a 30+ year study, I'm forgetting exactly how long it was that they found that you are impacted by the expectations and the behaviors of people that you haven't even met and don't even know exist in this network, because through other, through your first degree connections, mm-hmm. overall. And I'm not talking about like LinkedIn connections. I'm talking about people that you spend an inordinate amount of time with. Like the people that they spend time with end up impacting how you behave on a daily basis. Now, the moral of that story and the moral of that particular study is that be careful who you are signing on to spend a lot of time with. And that's just another reason out of many for us to make sure that we're doing our own due diligence. We're conducting our own interview process, but it starts with really knowing what you want. So if we go all the way back over to Laura's story, by the time she got to this point here where she was doing those test drive conversations, she was doing the social Goldilocks experiment, she was, I think, 4 or 5+ months into this career change process. And again, she wanted to quote unquote do it right. I think it's less about doing it right and more about finding what is in fact right for you. Mm-hmm. So at that point in time, she was not only learning what in fact was right for her, but when she did find a couple organizations and also roles and opportunities that she really wanted to dive further into, she now already had the relationships. Through these conversations with people that she didn't even know prior, she now had the beginnings of relationships where she could go back to them and say, hey, I am really excited about what we talked about. I would love to know more. I would, or the actual, conversation that she ended up having went something like this with a company called the Predictive Index, which turns out, they, well, ironically, they do some of the same things that we were talking about helping organizations do fit and things like that. So she was totally on board with that. She's like, that sounds amazing. I had just literally told my husband that, if I could work someplace that's doing assessments and digging into psychology and everything like that, like if that place existed, then that's the place I'd probably want to work at. And then a few days later, she like learns about this organization. So, she gets to the point where she has this relationship with someone at the organization, and now she can have a different level of conversation, which is, hey, I really, really appreciate you taking the time. I am really excited about what I learned. I would love to figure out how I might work here in the future and what that would take.